So what should you be looking for in chapter 1 of The Meaning of Jesus by Marcus Borg? A couple of things. Always look at the essential question. Always look at the title page kind of before the title, because both of these scholars are addressing in each of their respective chapters one major question. And the major question that Marcus Borg is addressing in this chapter is, how do we know about Jesus? This is a question of what philosophers and theologians like to call epistemology. Epistemology is the philosophical and academic study of knowledge. How do we know? I'm looking out the window right now and I see rain. How do I know that it's raining? So I can look and I can see it. But I'm not out there. I'm not getting wet in the rain. So do I really know that it's raining? Can I totally trust my eyes? Sure, yes. I mean, I think that I and many philosophers would agree that sure, I can trust that. But how do we know about things that happened 2,000 years ago? That's a different question. And that's a question that Marcus Borg is trying to address here. Notice the title of his chapter. So before you read this, just check out the title of his chapter, Seeing Jesus, Sources, Lenses, and Method. Those are the things that he's going to be talking about. I could kind of go off on a major tangent here and say this is how you write essays when you're in high school. Please write this clearly whenever you write to me. He's going to be talking about sources, and then he's going to talk about lenses, and then he's going to talk about methods. But a couple of things. Number one, he is a revisionist. Now, what that means is he describes how things are or how things were, and then he asks, is this really how it should be? Okay, he's a major revisionist, and if you get that in your mind early, you're going to be fine with Marcus Borg. So notice on the third chapter of page 3, so this opening page, what he does is he asks these questions and then he answers them in a very traditional way. But in that third paragraph, he says, but, that's a very important but over the last 200 years among historical scholars, both within and outside the church, this common image, the common image that he had described prior, has dissolved. And so what he's going to do is, since he's trying to be a revisionist in this book, he's going to revise these common terms. So let's walk through some of these terms you need to be aware of before you read this chapter. Number one, the Gospels as a developing tradition. Understand what he means by that. He differentiates then between history remembered and history metaphorized. Yes, I know he's making up this term here, but notice he's going to equate history remembered with the pre-Easter Jesus, Jesus before his death. And he's going to equate history metaphorized with the post-Easter Jesus, what Jesus became after his death. Again, this chapter is super logical, very straightforward. He'll then talk about the 4 lenses that he argues we should see Jesus through. And let me just give you a heads up. So if you will please turn to page 8. If you're really careful here, look at that first lens where it says the first lens is. So he says, and I wish that the editors would have cleaned this up a little bit, the first lens is the foundational claim of the modern study of Jesus that has already been described. So that actually isn't a lens. He goes on to say, namely, the first lens is the Gospels, or are the Gospels. And they are a product of the developing tradition. They include both history remembered and history metaphorized. He then goes on to talk about worldviews. You need to understand what he says, what he means by the secular worldview, and what he means by this. And you also need to understand what he means by the religious worldview, and what he means by this and more than this. And then finally, he concludes the chapter with a little bit of a discussion on method. But let me walk through the final kind of like the overarching theme here. A lot of my students, they like to talk about the split. Because both Marcus Borg in chapter 1 and then in chapter 2, you'll see here in a little bit, they both talk about 2 ways in which we can know about or know Jesus. And the question I want to leave you with is, does Marcus Borg advocate we split these 2 in half? That we should split the Jesus of history from the Jesus of faith? Another way to say that, should we split the Jesus of Nazareth, the historical figure, from the Jesus the Christ, the Christological and spiritual figure? Should we split these 2, or does he want us to combine them? So that's a question I'm not going to answer for you. Does he want them to be split, or does he want them to be together? Again, Marcus Borg is very clear in this chapter. He's a bit of a revisionist, and so that's going to throw a few of you guys for a loop. But your main goal in this is to understand his argument. How do we know about Jesus? Well, he's going to answer that. And you need to be able to articulate how we know about Jesus by the end of this chapter.